Erik Hollinger with the repatriation program of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. And he's responsible for repatriations in the Northeast, Midwest, Great Lakes, Great Basin, and California regions, as well as some cases in Alaska and in the Southwest. He has a master's in anthropology and a PhD in anthropology from the University of Illinois. He's also an adopted member of the Decloides clan. And he's co-presenting with Robert Starbard, a tribal administrator for the Hoonah Indian Association. Gentlemen?
HOONAH-SMITHSONIAN, thank you for coming, and we want to thank the Akwan and Takukwan for allowing us to be here, with welcoming us and allowing us to be present for this conference, this great sharing of knowledge event and opportunity for us all. Thanks, Steve, also, HOONAH-SMITHSONIAN, for the organizers of the conference and the great job that they've done pulling this together. Without them, none of us would be able to be here. Today, we're talking about an update on the HOONAH-SMITHSONIAN 3D collaboration on replication. But for that, we need a little bit of background on how the Smithsonian got involved in 3D replication of objects, and particularly my office, the repatriation office. And it started with this 14-inch pewter pipe, which is a Dutch-made pewter pipe that was found in a Delaware grave dating back to the 1600s. And the Delaware Stockbridge-Munsee repatriation representative had been to the Smithsonian and worked with our office training in osteology, and she saw some of the technology we had. There was CT scanners and X-rays and 3D replicators. And right before the repatriation, she said, that 14-inch pipe, is that something, can you guys scan that and then make a 3D print like you've been doing with some of the other objects and some of the bones and fossils that you work with? And we said, well, maybe we could do that. We'll try. And we had about 3 weeks before the repatriation, so we did it quickly. Made one print, and you see her holding it there in the picture. This is at the repatriation, where 3 tribes had come together, Delaware tribes, about 40 reps, to rebury human remains and funerary objects that they'd been reclaiming, and the pipe was part of that set. And after the repatriation took place, they came up to us and they said, we really like what you did with it, but you didn't have time to paint it so it looks like the original, so we're going to loan you back the original now. We'll take it back and have your exhibits people paint it so it looks just like the original, and then make 2 more. So all 3 tribes can have one, and we can have those in their tribal offices, and we can teach people about this repatriation, and we can help educate people about the material culture that we had back there in the 1600s. And because they didn't like having photographs of the event, and so it was only those people that were there for the repatriation that would be able to convey that story, and they wanted something that was a little more tangible, a little bit more longer lasting. So we made 3, and they allowed us to make one for the Smithsonian as well, and then they can rebury the original ultimately. Our next project was with the Decloides clan. In 2005, we repatriated this killer whale hat to Mark Jacobs in Sitka, and shortly before he passed away, but the hat was able to be with him when he passed. So 2 years later, when it was transferred to the new caretaker, Edwell John Jr., Edwell was familiar with some of the computing technology, had been to the Smithsonian and seen what we had done with other cases, and knew about the Delaware pipe example. And he asked us, could the 3D technology, could we scan the hat to allow it to be digitally archived for security in case it was ever need to be called on. If the hat was lost in a fire or damaged, maybe that file could be called on to help bring it back or repair it. And so we scanned that, and you see Bob Sam in the background there assisting with it as well. Bob asked us to scan his face just to see if we could scan that. We did. We should have printed his face too, so Bob could always be around. But we did scan it, and we made a 3-dimensional digital file for it then. And then we asked, well, Edwell, if you're interested in this, the potential for education with this, would you allow us to make a 3-dimensional replica to try to bring that forward so we can have a model, representation of that back at the Smithsonian while the Atu is here in Alaska and serving its intended purpose among the clans where it should be. And he agreed to allow us to do that, and we entered into agreement with the clan, and we were allowed to make a digital rendering to put up on the web too. So this can actually be seen at Smithsonian X3D at a website where they have about 20 objects from Amelia Earhart's flight suit to the Wright brothers plane. Some of the most important objects in the Smithsonian are up on the web in 3 dimensions. And school children in Australia, around the world, can download those and 3D print those, but not this killer whale hat. One restriction, the Klan leader Ed Wells said, cannot print this hat. We want people to be able to see it and learn from it and learn about the importance of repatriation, learn about these Klan hats, but we do not want them producing them and physically making them or making keychains out of them, or we don't want to lose that intellectual property rights, those cultural property rights control over that. So in making the replica of it, we took those digital files, and in this case, instead of a 3D print, we actually milled it using a computer-guided CNC milling machine. So it's actually carving that out of that block of wood there. Once it was carved, our model makers painted it to look just like the original. And they did not have the original with them. It was back here in Alaska. All they had were the digital files and photographs to work from. So this shows that if the original is lost for some reason, if you have good photography and good scans of it, you could produce something that looks as similar to the original as this. And this is in Klan Conference in 2012. For those of you who weren't there, we brought the replica hat back and revealed it, and this is Ed Wells' first reaction to it there. So he was pretty pleased with it, and the community was pretty good reaction from everyone there. And these are the 2 hats together, and they were danced together both here in Sitka, where the Klan Conference was, and then down in Washington, D.C. for the National Congress of American Indians the inaugural powwow. And in the museum, at the Natural History Museum, they both danced together here by the DSC boys, who are direct descendants of the Gush Dahin, who first owned the original hat. This is the hat as it appears today on exhibit in the Natural History Museum. So now we can physically show a representation of the hat and tell the story of the repatriation and tell the story of the replication process of it, and have a piece of it there while it still serves its purpose in the community here in Alaska. One unique element of this, of the agreement with this, although it's a museum-made object and accessioned and on loan to the education department there, is the agreement that we have with the Klan is they can check it off exhibit and dance it as regalia if they send dance groups back to D.C. for inaugural events or important events like that. And we just learned that there's likely to be a dance group down there in December, and we're hoping that maybe Edwell will send us a formal letter of request today. It has to be 30 days in advance because it's hard to get to this. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, and it might be the first time that it'll be checked off and danced again as regalia down there. As far as we know, that's never happened before. Anywhere in the world that a museum-made object has a relationship with the community where they can treat it as regalia. And Edwell came to the museum and addressed our board and explained to them the importance of repatriation. This is him wearing the original, and thanked them for the capability of exploring this new technology to have some educational potential and presence there for the Klan and the community, but still facilitate through repatriation the control of the Klan. That led to our next project with HOONAH. The HOONAH Indian Association requested repatriation of 53 objects. And while the repatriation assessment was underway, they authorized us to make a 3D print of one of the rattles as a prototype. So in this case, rather than the milling of the object, these are complex objects with interior structures. So they were CT scanned with a medical CT scanner here, just like you would use at a hospital. And that allows us to see inside the object as well as see details of the object that aren't present when you use a laser scanner. And here you see two views of the object. And you can actually see the beads inside it. That's an interior view of the beads that are inside the belly of that rattle. We would never be able to see that through the rattle. You can't open it up. You can't see through the cracks. So you can see those are drilled steatite beads that are soapstone beads that are inside that, and you can count them. And it also shows, you see the paint on the top view of the rattle, those red highlights there. That's mercury in the paint. So it's the X-rays are bouncing off the mercury because that's essentially a metal in there. So this even allows us to trace where are contaminants, where are potential hazards on the rattle that we might not know otherwise. So this allows us to learn a lot more about it just by examining it through the CT scanning. There's a close-up of the interior with the beads. So once we have the digital file from the CT scanners, then our model makers, they are able to, with the reference of the original in hand, clean up the digital files because there's some reflectance in there, whether from the mercury or if there's a nail or a piece of metal on it. X-rays bounce all around and it captures all that, and they have to go in and clean that up. And once they have that, right now our animation is not working on this, but this shows once you have that digital file, you could post it to the web, or you could give it to an artist, a carver, and on this you can actually, it turns it around and you can look at it and turn it upside down and look at it from multiple views, and you can do that with the killer whale hat replica online, or the digital file online, and zoom in on it. So a 3D printer, instead of milling the object, it actually is like a like your inkjet printer that you might have for paper at home. It is in a big machine about this big, and it kind of looks like a bed of powder. And it's the same inkjet printer goes back and forth across that bed of powder and lays down like a glue or a bonding agent, a little layer by layer at a time, and it hardens that powder. And then after it sits a little bit, it's hard enough that the model maker can just lift that out of the bed of powder and blow away the loose dust and brush away the loose dust, and you're left with a physical representation that's very, very accurate. And you can see here the model maker is painting it to look like the original, and there's the finished product there. So they can be very similar. And the beads were actually printed inside this, so it actually rattles. You can do moving parts. So, but there are more objects in the request, and these are some of the objects here, and I'll turn it over to Bob from here.
Thank you, Eric. The Hoonah Indian Association, when it was going through its repatriation, recognized that this new technology had a number of benefits, not only to the tribe, but to the clans and to the universities and stuff we were dealing with. As many of you are aware, Hoonah in 1944 burnt down, and we ended up losing many of our cultural objects. The ability, in one of the few places that we actually had access to some of these cultural objects that were otherwise, quote unquote, stolen from us, were in the museums. And as we were looking at through the repatriation process and sort of this melding of this new technology and with our older culture, it was how could we use this to our greatest advantage? And two things came to mind. One was the educational possibilities that came from having much more solid objects to deal with. Many of the objects in the museums are hundreds of years old, very fragile. You can't handle them much, if at all. And when you do, you certainly don't hand them over to children as part of an educational exhibit. Through this 3D process, this replication process, we're able to, or could envision where we could do that, where we could then take these objects and with our elders and our youth actually start sharing some of the stories and some of the histories and some of the techniques that went with them. The second element that was important to the tribe in looking at this, and we were very careful about how we proceeded with it. We've been doing this now for on this one project for about 3 years, and we've got several objects now copied and painted, as we've seen. But it's been a very incremental step. Does this step work? Okay, it works. Did we do it properly? Did we have we treated the items with the proper level of respect? Have we consulted with? Once we've completed a step, what do we have? Should we take it to the next? I mentioned the fact that the fire in 1944 destroyed much of Hoonah's artifacts and stuff like that. The idea of having these items, whether it be from the Smithsonian or any of the other university libraries, museums and stuff, digitizing and protecting those files, always having access to them at least digitally, as Erik has noted, gives you at least the capability at some point in the future, making copies of them or otherwise learning from that design, from those pieces. Many of you also may be aware that the Hoonah Indian Association has been involved with a NAGPRA claim with the University of Pennsylvania Museum for a number of years, and having won at all levels, including at the NAGPRA Appeals Board, unanimously, we still have been denied the objects from UPenn. And so working with the Smithsonian, I said, well, if we could establish a relationship with the Smithsonian that showed that the original objects could be treated with respect, they could be returned to the clans, and that the curating museum would still have access to the objects, even if they are replicas for display, or in the case of UPenn, they're sitting in the back rooms, that perhaps we might be able to move that relationship off of the sort of standoff we have now. We will see. Right now, we're not moving very fast with UPenn at all. But it has been a very interesting process. It is never easy to take a new technology and start using it for something that is historically and culturally significant to the clans. And so there's a level of suspicion, there's a level of distrust, and there's a apprehension to move forward, which is why we're doing it in a very incremental, very slow process. The objects that were at the Smithsonian were repatriated, as he noted, 53 of them, are of some special significance, and we didn't and chose not to delve on it too much as part of this presentation, but and I thought we might have a hand mic. I was going to, we've had a meeting with some of the elders off and on, and we had one just before this presentation. I would like to ask Ernie, and Ernie, if Lillian wants to come up with you, that fine. The objects that came from the Smithsonian are shamanic in nature. They belong to an Ik. As a consequence, there are a number of cultural consequences to consider. And because of some other reasons, which I'll let Ernie explain, I'm going to remove myself from the discussion right at the moment.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What we're been talking about here earlier today was, you see in the picture, the items here that they're trying to hopefully be able to get the blessing of our elder people. There's several elders in our community of HOONAH that we would have to get the clearance from each one of those different clans, as Bob is Dukdaintan, and I'm one of the Chukanati, so he's a raven and I'm an eagle from our tribe. And before we'd get any much further ahead in this project that they're trying to do, very fascinating, very fascinating. But some people will say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think we can have it done. And another clan might say, no, we don't think that's a good idea. Every time something new comes around, a new old object, that object might have been sold, stolen, found, and if it didn't belong to them, but they had it, they thought that they had all rights to it. When they're talking about one of these items here, it might be a shaman's part of his regalia that he has. Some people, and generally through ignorance of what they're looking at or what they want to see or they're hoping to see and get an opportunity to handle it, because this item apparently was hidden, or if it's in a museum, it's covered up or something. What these two young gentlemen here are hoping to be able to do is not hurt the owners. The owners are the ones that probably built these objects. There's some of our elders says that, no, you don't touch that. You stay away from it. That's a person of interest that some people don't understand. There's when I was growing up as a young kid, I would sit by my grandma, and the elders tell stories that they perpetuate year after year after year. And sometimes I'd ask them, how come these guys, they say that maybe down Prince Wales Island and somebody up in Hoonah area, communicate. Well, back then they didn't have radios or phones that you can talk back and forth. But those two guys have such strong powers. How do they communicate? They have their own way. It's powerful. And we, as myself, up in the upper 70s right now, learn to respect. Learn to respect somebody else's, what they're doing. Be very, very careful. And I hope that with modern technology that these young buffs here are hoping to be able to perpetuate what they have seen. It would be a wonderful tool if we can get the blessings of the different clans that say only if it's done their way, or there's some kind of document that says that we will give permission, but we have to think about it. The elders very cautious about what we've seen down in the museum down back east. I've already talked to a few, and some of them say, no, just leave it be down there. But then again, modern technology, we wouldn't even touch it. It'd be all done by electronics and come with a finished product that maybe our children, our grandchildren will learn how to know how this was put together. A little while ago we were listening to another session there. Question was asked, man, those guys are so powerful, and I told them, years ago, our fishermen, they were powerful guys. Skipper was very powerful, strong muscles. Well, back then, it used to be a chain, rope, cable that went to the steering wheel in the back. And all day long, the skipper's up there steering that boat. And day after day, they get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Some of them don't even sleep. And they're up there trying to maneuver their big fishing boats around. And as time and technology come around, man was trying to get something easier to use to get from one end to the ocean to the other. And along comes electronic stuff. Along comes the hydraulics. Now you can steer a boat just with your little finger now. And so you're not using your muscles. And these gentlemen here, they're being able to come forth with electronics, and hopefully they get the blessing and be able to have these repatriated so that our younger generation will understand, get to see inside without even touching it. And I think that, in my mind, it probably would be a wonderful tool that we could bring forth in the schools without even touching any of these objects, just by the pictures or x-ray or whatever they use they're talking about. And I think that would be a wonderful tool, because I remember one young man there, he had got a bright idea, and he had sea otter skin, and he put a zipper on it, just a plain zipper. And the feds found out about it, knocked on the door. Yeah, and he showed it to them. Next thing you know, they were hauling him off to Huskow. It's against the law to put anything on that robe you have other than a rope or a string or something. No zippers. And they threw him in jail. His lawyer had to talk like heck, because somebody back in Washington, D.C. said, you can't do that. It's against the law. But as modern times coming around, every time we look at something new, you ponder on it, is it safe? Can we do it respectfully? Can we be careful and not make waves from the original owner of what they're holding down there in the museum? Some people say, I don't believe that. That's your belief. There's some of our people, they don't want to touch it. They hear stories, they hear it, they were brought up to believe it. I'm still skeptical. I'd like to see it get the okay, but we will find out later on. But modern technology is, I believe, is here to stay. There was such, what's his name, President, guy that said we're going to go to the moon. Kennedy. Well, boom. They landed on the moon. Everybody's happier than heck. Just a few years later, now they wanted to go to another planet. So every time you turn around, something else new is happening. And I applaud these two gentlemen here. Hopefully they can find something, because the younger generations are getting smarter, and let's hope that whatever they come up with, we do not overstep our boundaries from the person that owns these items, because they're sacred. And we that know about stuff like this, we respect it. And we don't want to overstep the boundaries. But I'm also thinking that how else are we going to know about what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day? So I just wanted to give my 2 cents to you, young man, Bobby.
Thank you, Ernie. When Erik traveled here from the Smithsonian, he brought with him some of the examples of the 3D printing that has been done. Because, and in the meeting that preceded this session that we had with some of the elders, it was requested that we, while we have them available, we would ask that they not be handled. We will be open. We have a little display table at the back that, in the interests of showing proper deference to the objects and to the originals and to the shamanic nature, we would ask that if you're going to stop by the table to take a look at examples of the 3D, both the 3D printing as well as the model or the milling pieces that were done, that you don't actually handle them. We'll be back there. And part of the reason we're doing that is about the sensitivities. Ernie and him reminded me earlier that if you don't do things properly, you don't do things with proper deference, that bad things can come about. And since my mother is presently traveling to go take care of the estate of her sister who just recently died, they wanted her travels to be safe. So with that, I'll turn it back to Erik for some closing.
HOONAH-SMITHSONIAN.